Hey, good morning, Chris. Ron here. Another great webinar day.
Hi, Ron. It sure is. Very excited to dive in today. This one's going to be really cool. We're going to be talking about headless e-commerce platforms with auction. And this is a really powerful capability and something that we think listeners are really going to want to at least be aware of if they're not going to take advantage of it right away. We really strongly recommend that you kind of listen in and kind of get the main points. This will be really helpful to know about in the future, but a lot of you may end up immediately finding benefit in this, just learning about it and not having kind of known about it in the past, right?
Yeah. Well, and we're going to be talking about a few different terms like embedded. We'll talk about headless. We'll talk about decoupled. There's going to be a handful of good things, and we're going to dive into that today. So I think it's going to be very, very helpful. So if you want, why don't you go ahead and just kick us off and give us your definition, the technical definition of what headless means.
Yeah, absolutely. So really the kind of core concept here is that a lot of applications, the backend functionality and the data, they're kind of intermingled and married and just kind of a giant jumble with the UI. And so there's a kind of architectural concept around separating those. And it's really, the idea is that a lot of companies will use the same backend functionality and workflows and data across different mediums of user interface. And so this kind of terminology for that came about that's called headless. So you can kind of think of it as, I mean, it's kind of a crude analogy, but kind of think of it as like a headless body. And, you know, you've got all of the functions and organs, but you can swap out the heads. And the user interface in this analogy would be the head. And so you can have the same base functionality and data utilized across multiple different channels and mediums. And those are consuming the same workflows and data consistently and without having to do extra work, using this headless e-commerce model where basically you have the same engine and the same kind of fuel, if you want to think of it as like our analogy. But you have different kind of like bodies and interiors. And so that's kind of what we're going to be diving into and giving some examples of is kind of how does that practically work in the real world, right, Ron?
Yeah. Well, and it's not even just swapping out the heads or the bodies. That is technically what's capable, but it's the ability to then do them all at the same time simultaneously, right? So each head could use the body at the same time, meaning, and in real terms here, we could have a mobile app using the auction platform and people bidding on a mobile device, and you could have people bidding on a kiosk, and you could have people bidding on a website all at the same time, because all three of those heads or CMSs or however you want, whatever you want to call them, all of those application UIs are accessing that same body of functionality from the platform. So yeah, I love your analogies. That's exactly correct. So let's talk about how I'm just going to kind of define what cores is and how we've done that. And then I'd love you to kind of really dive into the API and what that does, the more of the tech speak that I don't know as well. So the great thing about it at a high level is that you can implement this in any CMS. So if you had a WordPress website, a Drupal website, Umbraco, .NET Nuke, Sitefinity, whatever you've got, you could literally have any existing corporate marketing website, and then you want to embed or expose the functionality within that website. It's almost kind of like, I think everybody on the call hopefully knows WordPress. I'm going to go grab a Gravity Forms plugin. I add that, and then Gravity Forms now has given me a UI where I have a page to create a form. When I save that form, it assigns it an ID. Then I go back out to a WordPress page and say, display form ID 7. And now embedded right on that page, it looks like it's a WordPress form, but it's not. It's a Gravity form displaying on a different page. And that's really what we're talking about. So we're talking about being able to go to any CMS and on any page or any mobile app on any UI and exposing auctions and the bidding UI and the sign up and verification UI, the registration, the login, all of those different elements can then be exposed in any of those UIs. Now, the main, if we're doing it with a website, one of the technologies we'll be talking about today is called CORS, C-O-R-S. And what CORE stands for is cross-origin resource sharing. And it's basically, I'm sure everybody's been on a browser at some point in time, clicked on a link and it popped up and said unsafe, or their browser has determined that they're leaving a safe link or something like that, and you shouldn't load it. And it's because the source that is trying to be accessed through that link is not a trusted source. So what CORE's meaning, the cross-origin sharing, means, hey, we're going to share our CMS space with another resource. And this resource may be over at a URL called auction.acme.com. I want you to trust any elements loaded from that other domain. And then I can now go to my corporate website, acme.com, and I can load any elements on any page from that domain. And I've basically told the browser through using COREs to go ahead and trust those elements to show up on the page. And it's not going to throw those errors. And it allows it to have this symbiotic trust relationship, right, between these two different domains. So that's just kind of what COREs does. And COREs allows us to embed elements on a web page. Now, there's a heck of a lot more than that, because you don't have to use COREs. You don't have to do that. You can literally access the platform and the API directly. And that's kind of where I want you to talk about, because that's where most of some of the other channels might come in that may not be able to simply just embed and display some of those elements, right?
Yeah. So that's exactly right. The explanation on COREs, I just want to hit on, just kind of bringing it home for the listeners that have an auction platform. What this means is you can literally have a embeddable component from the marketplace that we build with you, or that you build with another partner that does this. You can literally offer everyone who's holding an auction the ability to take a snippet of code that they don't have to know any software development. They can copy that code and drop it into their site. And of course, you've probably seen this with iframes and Google Maps and things like this, YouTube videos. But we're talking about a more immersive opportunity with using COREs and using headless e-commerce. So it can be much more of a rich experience that they can incorporate into their site. Now, the beauty here is that we can kind of calibrate the level of fidelity that that experience is kind of presented in. It can be a simple block of code that they paste in, just like you would with a YouTube video or a Google Maps. Or it can be something more robust, where it's like you were talking about, Ron, it's taking advantage of these APIs and these endpoints. And the really cool thing for auctions, for most auctions, there is some form of needing to upload and input different auctions into the system. And this can be quite a challenge, especially at scale, if everything has to happen through the site itself. So typically we're going to, at minimum, want to be able to take advantage of leveraging mobile and tablet applications, especially have native capabilities with the camera and video and things like this. Being able to leverage those tools, even barcode scanning, just some of those basic things that we want to incorporate, make it easier for the user. An example would be they can barcode scan something if it has a SKU or et cetera. Then it will attempt to auto-populate the description and the content. And then they can take a picture, and it will, if this makes sense for your particular scenario, it will go ahead and put the geocode information on there so we can see that it's a legit picture, and verify that. There's some things that we can do around this. Anyway, long story short, the beauty here is that all of this, whenever we're using headless e-commerce for auctions, is the data is going to push into the same database that's being used to present the site. So without having to change anything on the back end, without having to add extra pieces, we can build a mobile and tablet application. We can also do things like build a specific use case scenario, maybe for a particular category. So we can have a whole nother site that maybe is just a really simple site that's based on WordPress. And that site is just for a particular segment of, let's say, like, real estate in a particular market. And it's a wholesale real estate purchasing group. So maybe your business is selling homes online, but now you want to go after wholesale real estate and maybe sell to like institutional investors for a particular set of regions. And you just want a simple site that speaks to them. Well, what would it be like to then just easily leverage your investment that you've already made into a robust e-commerce platform for auctions, and then basically parlay that into other niche focuses that you can dominate. And that's really one of the major benefits of headless e-commerce is you literally can take this extremely powerful functionality and this need for consistent data across your enterprise and deliver it in this kind of, precision format that's surgically delivered for a particular niche. And so it's just really, really powerful capability. One of the other things that we see a lot with this is working with partners. So you're at an event and you're networking and you meet another auction platform group and they say, man, it would be so awesome if we could get your auctions onto our system and help syndicate some of what you're doing. We would love to, partner with you guys. It's not really overly competitive. And, maybe we could kind of cross function with promoting our auctions together. And so what do you do? Like, that sounds great, but what do you do mechanically to do that at scale? Well, you want them to be able to access your data and restrict it to, what part of that data you want them to have access to. So you can do that with a headless e-commerce for auctions. We basically, based on the user roles and kind of, without getting into the detailed weeds, we can expose that data. So there are several other examples that I think we'll get into as we go, but I think the summary here, Ron, is that it's a really powerful capability that you're going to want to think about as you're planning out your project so that you can continue to benefit from your investment in your platform long after that initial investment is done.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't have been said better. Yeah, one of the things too, as you were saying that I really like, most of the examples we've given so far, and that we're probably going to talk about the pros on this one, is on the front end. But for you and I being executives, let's say you and I had invested a few million in this auction site, but we weren't really involved in the day-to-day. What do you and I want to know what's going on? Well, wouldn't it be great to, in our corporate dashboard where we track sales and everything else, to be pulling how many active auctions do we have? What were the sales today? How many, we can literally go in via that API call and pull out any of the reporting data that we want and expose that in our corporate management dashboard as executives. So it's not only the front end and being able to share this across, omni-channel. It really is on the back end of the management too. And as Chris just said, when you start getting into partners, isn't it nice if you're cross-selling and cross-promoting, how many sales have come in from the cross-partner sharing, and you're starting to track some really different advertising and things like that. You want to be able to get to that information very granularly. And that's really kind of what we're talking about here. So let's talk about some of the pros of the platform. And obviously I think the big one for the front end that we've been mostly talking about is the devices, right? So we can embed that software capability across the physical devices. So if you want, go ahead and talk about some of those devices. And I'd like you to also talk and introduce Decoupled UI, because I think a lot of times, at least some of the clients that I've spoken to, when they hear headless, it scares the living daylights out of them, because they're like, great, I can embed it. But now if you don't have a UI for some of this stuff, I have to go build out all the UI elements myself, right? And so there is a difference between headless and decoupled. And I'd like you, as you go through this, to also talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's a difference between having a opinion and then having a requirement. And basically, headless e-commerce, essentially, in most typical scenarios, the way that it's set up is it literally has a requirement that you just build everything with your UI from scratch. Now, a lot of the platforms out there have kind of figured out that they need to have templates and kind of baseline standards. And this becomes what we would call decoupled, where they have an opinion, but it's not a requirement. And, non-headless e-commerce and non-headless, auction platforms, they have a requirement in that you have to start from whatever UI they've built that everything is tied to. So that's probably worse than headless e-commerce. But like you're saying, you don't want to have a headless e-commerce system that literally has, just think about a car. You don't want to buy an expensive vehicle and it literally has no chairs and no air conditioning. It's just an engine and a chassis
Yeah.
and a steering wheel. So
Yeah.
basically decoupled.
Yeah. We have holes in the dash.
Yeah. Decoupled essentially includes a UI and it includes examples of UIs, but it is decoupled in the sense that you don't have to use that UI. You don't have to use that interior and that, just kind of overall shell of the car. You can replace it easily, and it was designed to be replaced. And so that's really what decoupled is. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And that's really where the space is headed, consistently. So if you are looking at a headless e-commerce auction platform and you find that they don't actually have examples and kind of like an opinion, a great starting place for your industry, you might want to consider other options. Certainly, there are a lot of options out there. We're one of them. We strongly believe in decoupled as opposed to just headless. And, I think, Ron, this is probably pretty self-explanatory, but any other kind of thoughts that you have to share on that as well?
Yeah. But I mean, it's kind of like, how much do you want to spend and how long do you want to take to get to market, right? It's one thing to come in and have to start from scratch, right? Or it's another thing to come in and say, hey, we already have a lot of this pre-built. You're certainly welcome to use these elements. And you could even mix and match. And that's part of what I think is great, right? So let's say somebody wanted to set up a kiosk. So when somebody comes in, they could log in and bid because they don't have those auctioneers in the room that are yelling, and accepting all the bids. And so they want to be able to walk up to a kiosk, see the active auctions, and then bid on their auctions from anywhere, right? Well, they could do that. Well, maybe you don't want to go pay, and I'm making up a number here, but let's say it's $25,000 to, from scratch, build that kiosk interface. Well, let's say with Clarity, we already have that interface. So you may want to build from scratch the website auction interface and embed all that in your existing website. But the kiosk interface, you want to go ahead and use what we've already built, as Chris calls our opinion. We have an opinion on what that should look like. You're welcome to use that software. So for maybe some channels, so you can very quickly get up and running on the multiple mediums that Chris talked about. Maybe some of it you do use the off-the-shelf decoupled templates and UIs that are built. And then others, you want to completely control and customize the UI and the user experience. And so those might be built from scratch. So that's why the last bullet here, I really wanted to make a point that it may be possible to use an existing mobile responsive UI for the tablets, the kiosks, the mobile. So you don't have to build that from scratch, even though you might want to fully embed, customize, and build from scratch the web experience, right? The desktop experience. So let's go ahead and move on to the next section here, where we're talking about the ease of use, right? And utilizing why headless is efficient, why it's effective, and how. Why would we do this? Why wouldn't we just go grab an off-the-shelf auction platform? I mean, really, we talked about some of the benefits of the channel here, right? And being able to go omni-channel and multi-device. That made a lot of sense. So now let's dive in a little further and talk about efficiency of starting with a platform that already has the building blocks, right? Already has the Legos pre-built.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think if you can imagine starting with a vehicle, kind of using the vehicle analogy, that is all one piece of metal, like the body, the interior, the chassis, every single part that can be fused together and is one piece of metal, that might be really efficient from a cost perspective. But as you adapt that vehicle and grow and need to use it for other things, you will outgrow that non-flexible, very rigid framework that you have. And that's fundamentally what happens with software as businesses grow. And the bottom line is the e-commerce auction platform is meant to serve and designed to serve the business and the end users, not the other way around. And a lot of businesses, they end up serving their software. and they don't even realize it. And it's just kind of like this natural progression for them. But they end up having to change their entire business model. I mean, I can literally tell you there's got to be like 100 different entrepreneurs and business owners that I've met with and talked with that has spent millions of dollars on products that are just too rigid, and they end up getting stuck and painted into a corner and have to start completely from scratch because it was too rigid. And no system is perfect. The architectural model here, though, is that things are not tied together so rigidly, and this gives you flexibility. And as long as we play our cards right, we can get the benefits of having rigidity in the sense that we have an opinion, and it's an opinion that's based on data and analysis and a feedback loop of the industry of what works really well. But we can easily go change it. And this is really the best of both worlds, because as long as you can easily go change it, and then very importantly, extend that same functionality into other mediums and not have to redo everything in order to do that. This is a really powerful framework. In particular, like, think about the idea of, again, using the car analogy, you have this very rigid framework. Well, if it's too rigid, then you're not going to be able to kind of clone it and use it in another arena. With a lot of platforms that are monolithic and they basically have everything tied together and married together, so tightly coupled, the UI is tied so heavily to the business logic, is tied so heavily to data layer. You can't have an omni-channel capability without redoing almost everything, because there's kind of this dependency built into the application that it's expecting certain things, and it's just not able to handle a scenario where you have multiple different uses for the same API. And so that, again, is just kind of one of these exercises that we've consistently gone through over the last decade, building and kind of massaging in these capabilities for omni-channel, really being able to do cross-origin resource sharing and fully, faithfully execute on headless e-commerce for auctions.
Yeah. And I wanted to give one example that I don't, and you'll have to clarify this, because it was you and I were talking, and it was a couple of years ago, and we were looking at a couple competitor products, and I was griping to you about one of our developers going through and ripping out and replacing one of the technology stacks for one of the modules that we had in our platform. And I'm like, why do we keep changing? Why do we have to do that? And you showed me one of our competitors' products, and you opened it up, and they were running, it was like 15-year-old classic ASP code. And you said, this is why right here. And it was almost exactly what you just said. It's like, they've run this code and they haven't changed for the last 15 years, and they cannot change like we can. However, because we built in this modular format, we don't like the seats in the car anymore. We want to switch to leather. So we're just going to rip the seats out and switch to leather. And that's kind of going from Angular JS to,
React.
the new version of JS, or swapping out from Angular to React or whatever. We're constantly making changes to technology and improving as the industry and as new features and as things change and requirements change and more experiences change. I mean, AI, right? We have an AI module now. Why do we have that? Well, because the market's starting to need things that start more intelligently telling you, hey, these other auctions are auctions similar to what you did, or these other auctions are the most recent auctions selling the same item you're looking at, or these other auctions are coming up for sale in the next 30 minutes. And you in your scout said you're interested in these types of things, and to automatically notify you, right? So as the business changes and as needs change, I mean, we don't have ESP, we're not mind readers. We can only plan so much into the future. But I hear you say almost every time we talk, you got to plan 3 to 5 years out. Well, how do you plan for 3 to 5 years out if you have no idea? I mean, COVID just changed the entire world. Nobody saw that coming, right? Well, maybe some people saw it coming, but that changed the whole world. And how did we succeed and work through COVID and grow through COVID? Well, it was because the way we set up our business, we set it up. Even though we've been in business many, many years, we act like a startup company because we planned for change. And so the most important point of this is, when you look at a platform, make sure that that platform is architected for change. Make sure it's architected for growth. You don't want to go buy a platform that's written in classic ASP that hasn't been updated in 15 years, that 3 years from now, when a requirement comes in that you need, they're like, sorry, you're going to have to rip and replace that. And you spent $500,000 over the last 3 years implementing this thing, and now you have to rip and replace the whole entire thing. That would be a worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is really cool. I mean, one of the things that we see all the time is that clients have great success with their auction platforms and their e-commerce functionality in general. And then they want to move to a mobile application, work with partners, kind of, maybe do some really adaptive advertising where they want to dynamically present ads. And, they need that data to be presented to these ad platforms. I mean, the list goes on. There's so much fun and excitement going on. And you really need to look for a partner. And this space is just burgeoning and growing and just massively expanding. So you need to look for a partner who has your best interest in mind over the long term. And they're making those investments internally. Headless e-commerce, and in particular, decoupled e-commerce for auctions, is absolutely a requirement. You just encourage you to think of it that way and just understand that this is another piece of the equation that's really going to help you down the road to work with a software platform that's going to serve your business and your customers, as opposed to you having to change your entire business and customers be frustrated by your software. So I think that's a great ending point for this one, Ron. What an exciting thing to get to offer all of these opportunities to our clients. If you guys have any questions and you want to find out more, feel free to hit us up in the comments. Of course, you can reach out to us via our website. We offer complimentary discoveries, and this is a great way, if you're interested, and it's not going to cost you anything, to just find out more and see if there's an opportunity for us to guide and point you in the right direction, or potentially work together. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, totally agree. So clarity-ventures.com, schedule a demo. I'll jump on a call with you and see if we can't help you out. Thanks for your attention today. Smash that like button if you appreciated today's video, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye for now.